Hello, welcome to lesson 2 on module 1. We're now going to focus on rounding and estimating. So rounding can come in two parts really. It can come rounding to decimal places, rounding to significant figures, and they're the two topics that we're going to mainly focus on, and how then that links to estimating and approximating. So rounding, you're sometimes asked questions at the beginning of the paper. Those are low value mark questions of 1 or 2 marks, where it will say round these numbers to 1 decimal point, 2 decimal points, 2 significant figures, 3 significant figures, and they are what I'd call standalone questions. However, more importantly, throughout the paper, you will also be asked to leave your answer in a particular form. So leave it to 2 decimal places, leave it to 3 significant figures, etc. And that's where, if we don't get this part sorted, you will lose quite a few marks, okay? So we're going to start there. And we're going to start with rounding to decimal places. So how do you round to decimal place? First of all, you need to understand what it means if it says to 2 decimal places. And it's talking about the number of integers, the number of digits, that it needs after the decimal place. So currently, this would be to 4 decimal places because there are 4 numbers after the decimal place. So how do we round to a specified number of decimal places? This question then, let's get the pen tool sorted. So look at the place column where you want to round it to initially to start with. So highlight that, okay? Take a highlighter with you. That's 2 decimal places. So that means we want to end the number after 2 decimal places. That is our number which we want the last number to be. Now look at the column directly to the right of it, okay? The number directly to the right is an 8. If it's less than 5, 1, 2, 3 or 4, we can literally then ignore those numbers and your answer would be 456.92. However, this number is 8. If it's 5 or more, we have to round up the number before. So that 2 becomes 3. So our final answer for that would be 456.93. Now, as I said, that's slightly different. This was if it's less than 5, so that number was 5 or more because it's an 8. So let's look what happens if we're considering numbers, there we go, that are less than 5. So round 45.928 to 1 decimal place this time. Right, be really careful when you're reading the question, the number of decimal points it wants. So that means the 9 would be the last number in the number that it wants you to round it to. So 45.928. Look at the number after the 9. It's a 2. It's less than 5. Therefore, we're rounding down. By rounding down, that means simply get rid of those numbers there at the end, okay? So your final answer would be 45.9. Now, there are some trickier examples of this, and we will go over some more in the lessons. But sometimes if you've got a number such as 45.9, and we then need to round it up, I'll show you what happens for that sort of thing. So let's imagine we had the number 45.9, and this time we've got a 5 after it. Okay, it's 5 or more. So if you wanted that to 1 decimal place, how would we do that? So to 1 decimal place, that means that's our number that we're going to be looking at. And we consider the number to the right of it, okay? So it's 5 or more. We need to round up the number before, don't we? So it's currently a 9 though. How do we round that up? It should be a 10. The number after 9 is a 10, but we can't write 45.10, okay, because that would be less than the number 45.9. So we're adding on 1/10. 45.9 goes to 46, okay? Now it's important that you write 46.0, because if you didn't include that 0.0, you wouldn't be rounding it to 1 decimal place. You'd be rounding it to no decimal places. So 46.0 would be your final answer of rounding that one to 1 decimal place. Right, I'm just going to pause it while we get ready for the next section on rounding to significant figures. Okay, let's get started with the second section then on significant figures, rounding to significant figures. The hardest part that students struggle with, if they struggle with this at school, is knowing what a significant figure is. Now, for significant figures, you're reading from the left to the right, so starting as if you're reading a book, the number on the left, and the first non-zero number, the first significant figure is the first non-zero number. So, for example, the example down here, 4,208, The first non-zero number is a 4, so that's your first significant figure. The second significant figure would be 2, the third significant figure would be 0, and the fourth significant figure would be 8. Notice how the 0 is included in the figure as a significant figure because it's within the number. However, if you had a number such as normally it's going to be a number less than 1. So imagine we had the number 0.0408. Now, this time that is only a 3 significant figure number. These zeros don't count. Reading left to right, we only start when we get the first number that isn't a 0. So 4 would be your first significant figure, and then every number subsequently, whether it's a 0 or a different digit, is significant. So first, second, and third significant figure. So that's clarification on when zeros are included and when zeros are not included in your significant figure count. Okay, so let's look through the example. It's really important, to follow the idea that 5 or more, we're rounding up the number before again, as we did with decimal points, and also to fill in zeros to the decimal point. We'll clarify that a little bit more as we go along. Right, so let's have a look at the first example. And we're rounding 4,208 to 2 significant figures. Okay, so we want the number to end between after the 2. We don't want any more significant figures after the 2 because that's first significant and the second significant. So like rounding, we look at the column to the right. If it's 5 or more, we need to round up that number before, so the 2 would become a 3. But in this case, because it's not, we don't need to do any rounding up, and we simply replace all the numbers after the second significant figure with zeros. So 4,200 would be your final answer there, okay? If you did have to round up, you would round up that number and still replace it with the zeros. Now, we're saying replacing with zeros up to the decimal point. Remember from the last lesson, 4,208 would actually have a decimal point straight directly after that 8 there, okay? And we have to replace the numbers that you're getting rid of with zeros up to that decimal point. I'm just going to clarify what I mean by that now on an example where you would have to replace them. So let's have a look. Just sweep that part away. Okay, so if you had the number 3,850.2. Okay, so we want that to, let's say, 2 significant figures again. You might sometimes see SF, that stands for significant figures. We want it to 2 significant figures. So 3 is the first significant figure, 8 is the second significant figure, and following that, we don't want any more significant figures, so they're going to have to be zeros, okay? So look at the number straight after. It's a 5. If it's 5 or more, we round up the number before. It is more than 5, isn't it? So that 8 has to become a 9, and it's only that number before that we're rounding up. So we're starting with 39. Now the numbers afterwards have to be replaced with zeros up to the decimal point. That means we have to put two zeros in there because your decimal point is here. After the decimal point, we do not have to replace the numbers with zeros. So that's just a little bit of clarification there on what I mean when I'm saying replace the zeros up to the decimal point. This next section then, estimation and approximation, leads on very well to significant figures, because if a question asks you to estimate an answer before doing any calculations, you must round each number to 1 significant figure, okay? Or in some cases, but hardly ever, it's not 1 significant figure. It's a number that just makes it easier to work with. But we're just going to start with the basis. We're rounding them all to 1 significant figure prior to doing the calculation, okay? It makes it easy to do mentally. If the calculation after rounding it to 1 significant figure doesn't make it easier, then this is some of the small cases where you have to play around with it a little bit more, but we're not going to worry about that now, okay? So 3.6 to 1 significant figure, so that's your first significant figure. 6 means you're rounding up the number before, and that becomes a 4, okay? So the 3 becomes a 4, and we don't have any zeros to replace because we're at the decimal point. Right, similarly with 4.2, okay, we want it to one significant figure. The 4 is the first significant figure, so we need to consider the 2. Is it 5 or more? No, it's not. So we can just literally erase that, get rid of it. No zeros to replace because we're at the decimal point. So rather than do 3.6 times 4.2, the actual calculation we're doing is simply 4 times by 4, and 4 times by 4 is 16. Now, some of you might be thinking, especially with some of the addition and the subtraction questions when you're asked to do them, you might think, hang on, I can do that. I can work out an exact answer. Why do I need to estimate? I'm going to give them an exact answer. Surely I'll get the marks. Unfortunately, you don't. It's going to take you longer. It's going to be harder. And you're still not going to get the marks after all, because if it asks you to estimate, you must estimate, okay? If it asks you to work out an approximate answer, you round them first before doing the calculation, okay? So please make sure that you do that. Right, that's it for that one. Let's see you on the next one.